They say the mountains don't care if you live or die. But in the North Cascades, it's different. The mountains there, they don't just wait for you to freeze. They hunt. On January 14th, 4 experienced hikers vanished. When the search and rescue teams finally found the camp, what they saw defied every law of nature. The tent was ripped open, from the inside. Bodies were found a mile away, undressed in sub-zero temperatures, with injuries that no human or animal could inflict. This is the story of the Cascade incident. This is what the official reports refuse to tell you. Alex, Sarah, Mike, and Chloe weren't amateurs. They had the best gear. But by the third night, the atmosphere shifted. The forest went silent. No birds, no wind, just a heavy, suffocating pressure. Sarah was the first to notice the infrasound. A low-frequency hum that vibrates in your bones, making your stomach turn and your mind spiral into pure, irrational panic. They felt like they were being watched by something massive, something hidden just beyond the reach of their flashlights. 2:00 a.m. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees. Inside the tent, Mike woke up to a sound, a voice. It sounded exactly like Alex, calling for help from outside. But Alex was sleeping right next to him. Mike looked at the tent wall. A hand, pale, with fingers too long to be human, pressed against the fabric. It didn't claw, it vibrated. Suddenly, the hum became a roar. Panic took over. In a fit of unexplained terror, they didn't use the zipper. They took their knives and slashed the tent open from the inside, sprinting out into the freezing darkness, barefoot. Search teams later found Mike and Chloe under a cedar tree. They had tried to climb it, their fingernails ripped off as they clawed at the bark in desperation. But it wasn't the cold that killed them. Mike's skull had been crushed, not by a rock, but by extreme pressure. As if his head had been caught in a giant vice. Sarah was found in a creek. Her tongue missing, but there was no blood. It was as if it had been surgically removed, or dissolved. And Alex? Alex was found the furthest away. His skin had turned a strange, burnt orange color, and his hair had gone completely white. The most chilling piece of evidence was Alex's camera. The final frame wasn't a monster or a bear. It was a photo of the sky. A glowing, pulsating orb of light hovering directly above the camp. But the twist? The autopsy reports were leaked years later. The internal radiation levels in their lungs were off the charts. They didn't die from an avalanche or an animal. They were collected. And as the search leader looked at the footprints in the snow, he realized the most terrifying detail: the footprints didn't lead to the camp. They started in the middle of the snow, as if something had been dropped from above. The Cascades are still there. And so is the hum. If you hear it, don't run. It's already too late.
In southeastern Massachusetts, there is a 200-square-mile void where logic goes to die. They call it the Bridgewater Triangle. For centuries, this land, specifically the Hockomock Swamp, has been a magnet for the impossible. Giant birds with 15-foot wingspans, glowing orbs, and creatures that look like men but move like shadows. Most people stay on the paved roads. But Elias Thorne thought it was all a campfire story. He wanted to prove that the Devil's Swamp was nothing more than bad lighting and overactive imaginations. He was wrong. And his final recording proves that some places on Earth belong to things that aren't from here. Elias and Ben entered the Hockomock at 4 p.m. The first thing they noticed wasn't a monster, it was the smell. Rotting meat mixed with ozone. Then came the silence. In a healthy swamp, you hear frogs, crickets, and birds. Here? Nothing. As they reached the center of the triangle, their compasses began to spin uncontrollably. Ben checked the camera battery, it was draining at 1% per second. "We're being watched," Ben whispered. Elias laughed it off, until he looked up. Perched on a dead oak tree was a pukwudgie, a gray, knee-high humanoid with porcupine-like needles on its back. It didn't attack. It just pointed a finger at them and vanished into thin air. Sunlight didn't fade, it was swallowed. At 8:00 p.m., a massive, screeching sound tore through the air. Above them, a shadow larger than a small plane blocked the moon, a thunderbird, a creature of Native American legend, thought to be extinct for millennia. Panic set in. As they ran toward the exit, the ground beneath them began to vibrate. Orbs of light, the will-o'-the-wisps, surrounded them, dancing between the trees. Every time a light touched a tree, the wood seemed to char and smoke. They weren't just lights, they were burning hot. Ben tripped, his flashlight hitting a pile of stones, an ancient colonial altar stained with something dark and fresh. They reached an abandoned clearing near the Freetown State Forest. Elias turned to check on Ben, but Ben was standing perfectly still, staring into the darkness. "Ben, let's go!" Elias shouted. But Ben didn't move. He just pointed into the woods. Standing there was a black shuck, a spectral black dog the size of a bear, with eyes that glowed like embers. The air temperature dropped 40 degrees in an instant. The creature didn't bark, it spoke. It used Elias's own mother's voice, calling him home. Elias grabbed Ben's arm to pull him away, but Ben's skin felt like ice. "That's not a dog," Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "That's a hole in the world." Elias made it back to the car. He drove for 3 hours without looking back. It wasn't until he reached the safety of his brightly lit apartment that he dared to check the camera. He expected to see the thunderbird, the pukwudgie, and the black dog. But as he hit play, his heart stopped. The footage didn't show any monsters. It showed Elias and Ben walking through the swamp, but they weren't alone. In every single frame, there were hundreds of transparent, human-shaped figures standing inches away from them, their mouths wide open in a silent scream. And the twist? In the final frame, Elias sees himself from behind. But the Elias in the video turns to the camera, winks, and his face melts into the gray skin of a pukwudgie. Elias looked in his own hallway mirror, and realized he didn't have a reflection anymore. The triangle doesn't just scare you. It replaces you.
The official story says it was a weather balloon. They lied. They told the public it was a secret spy project. They lied again. On July 4, 1947, something fell from the sky onto Silas Miller's ranch in Roswell, New Mexico. It wasn't made of metal, and it wasn't piloted by little green men. It was made of something that felt like wet leather, and it was breathing. Silas went out to protect his land, thinking it was a downed plane. But what he found in the wreckage wasn't a machine. It was a harvest. And the harvesters were still alive. Silas reached the crash site under the cover of a lightning storm. The air smelled like burnt hair and copper. There, in a trench carved into the earth, lay a craft that looked like a giant, punctured lung. It was pulsating. As Silas stepped closer, his flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, he heard a sound like a wet sponge being squeezed. Squish. Click. Squish. He felt a presence behind him. Something tall, spindly, and moving with a terrifying, jerky grace. He fired his gun into the dark. A high-pitched, frequency-shattering scream ripped through the air, and for a second, the lightning illuminated a face. No nose, no ears, just massive, oily black eyes that reflected Silas's own terrified face back at him. Silas burst into his house, screaming for Leo to hide. But the house was already changing. The walls were sweating that same purple liquid. Gravity felt wrong. Objects on the table began to drift toward the ceiling. Outside, the sky wasn't dark anymore. It was a blinding, humming white. Then, the men in black arrived, but they weren't government agents. They were figures in heavy lead-lined suits, carrying vibrating canisters. They didn't help Silas. They ignored him. They were there to clean the site. Silas watched in horror as one of the agents took off his helmet. Underneath, his face was melting, his human features being absorbed by a gray, pulsating mass. Silas woke up strapped to a table. But it wasn't a table, it was a ribcage. Above him, he didn't feel pain. He felt his memories being erased, being downloaded like data. Silas woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and no memory of the night before. The ranch was clean. No wreckage, no purple blood. He walked outside to Leo. "Hey, Leo, did you see the storm last night?" he asked. Leo turned around. He looked normal, but as he smiled, Silas noticed something. Leo's pupils didn't dilate in the sun. They stayed massive and black. Silas looked at his own hands. The skin was starting to turn a faint, translucent gray. The twist? The crash at Roswell wasn't a failure. It was a success. The aliens didn't leave. They just swapped places with us. Silas looked at the weather balloon report in the newspaper and laughed, a sound that came from two different throats at once. The cover-up wasn't to protect the secret of aliens. It was to protect the secret that we are already gone.
Comment down below if you had ever experienced any horror or scary incident. And don't forget, like, share and subscribe.